fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
Several shots were fired as President Kennedy's motorcade passed through downtown Dallas.
None of us will ever forget this day. Yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world.
Mr. Houston, say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Welcome to the Hagmann Daily Show, weekdays 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And now your hosts, Joe Hagmann and Jon Robberson.
Hello and welcome to this Tuesday, March 20th edition of the Hagmann Daily Show. Today is the first day of spring, and I don't know if it feels like it where you live, but up here where we are, it is still pretty cold. We got a lot to get into today, as there is some very interesting breaking news this morning and this afternoon, which is one, we have a school shooting in Maryland that is very sad, but at the same time proves a point that we've been talking about here in the United States about the debate between arming school teachers, having more police in the schools. And it looks like this shooting, a man came into the school around 8:15 a.m., shot a woman, shot a male student who are both in critical condition, and then was shot by a school resource officer, a police officer. And the shooter has since died, according to Fox News just a few minutes ago. And it is an evolving situation, but we're going to be, of course, be learning more of how this unfolded. But, this looks to, I would say, John, prove a point that having somebody with a firearm in school can prevent further deaths from occurring. Now, we don't know if these two were the only targets. It does not seem like that. It seemed like this unfolded pretty quickly, and a lot different than the Florida shooting. We saw the school issue a statement saying the incident was contained, and they did not release any other information until authorities sorted through everything and decided to do that, which was just that there were 2 injuries, and then the shooter was shot also, but he has died at the scene. Also, we have the unfolding situation in Austin, Texas. The bomber who has continued to terrorize the town has inadvertently struck again as a device explodes inside of a FedEx building outside San Antonio. Now, we're going to talk about the possibility of another device that was confiscated by law enforcement authorities, and I guess we could call it a working profile. John, you and I both have a different opinion, or similar opinions, I guess, with what and who this person might be as far as, age and race. And we have no idea of motivation, but we're going to talk about some of the things that we've noticed, at least from what we can tell from the information we've been given about the evolution of this bomber and how we think this might play out moving forward. So, to the school shooting, John, what have you seen anything else besides the injuries to the 2 students? Have you seen it being reported that the shooter died?
Yes, I have. In fact, Fox News, I think, was first out with it. They reported that shooter dead, 2 injured after shooting at Great Mills High School in Maryland, and the gunman, shooter dead right there in the headline. But Joe, this brings to mind something that we need to sort of make a distinction in between, which is, as you said, in Florida, that I perceive that as a school shooting designed to be a mass casualty event. So that shooter went into the facility to essentially try to rack up a death count, which seems to be a huge motivating factor ever since April of 2007 with Virginia Tech. That seems to be what drives a lot of these unhinged people, is they want the body count. Now, the other type of school shooting that occurs fairly regularly, and I was looking at a map of school shootings before we jumped on the Daily Show today, is the revenge or a high school beef that's gotten out of hand and somebody brings a gun to school, a lovers type thing, young broken heart type thing, or a couple of guys that, I don't know. Maybe I'm an old guy, but back in my day, we met at 3:00 and it was fists. Nobody brought guns to school. But I suspect this Maryland thing kind of feels to me like this might be different from the Florida thing. I'm not sure that this shooter went into the school to rack up a body count. I think he had targeted victims.
Well, I don't know. And that's something we're definitely going to learn as we move forward in this investigation, because all we know is that the 2 students were shot, then the shooter was shot, but was, how close was that resource officer? Was this something that, as you said, John, was a more of a and these people have, in this school district, you've seen 1 month ago, there were social media threats in the possibility of a shooting. So that element is here also. And you're right, John, to break this down into, the body count type shooters versus the revenge type shooters. And sometimes those motivations overlap, but that's usually what is the cause. And you see more with if it's just the revenge or bullied kids, they usually target just the people who have inflicted or perceived to have inflicted the damage on to the child. So is that what we have here? I don't know. We're going to obviously learn more. They're going to have a press conference, I think, in another hour or two on this shooting. So we will learn more, and we will continue to report. I haven't even posted anything on Hagmann Report about this yet, but I did get the Austin bombing story first thing this morning, and then I moved it up to the top. And there are a number of articles out there talking about this. Now, one of them is talking about the evolution of this bomber and what we've seen from packages being hand delivered to people's porches to then the escalation of a tripwire. And apparently, if I had to guess, John, probably Sunday or Monday morning, right when he went out to set the tripwire bomb, he probably dropped those other packages. The law enforcement won't even confirm that these incidences are related, but obviously they're related in some way, either by a copycat or this bomber is evolving. And we talked about this yesterday. He wasn't sending packages through the mail. It seemed rather limited in his ability to strike, at least within Austin. He's kept it to just Austin. But are we seeing him move beyond the Austin lines? Or was this just a mistake as the package was addressed to an Austin address? I don't know. But it's a very interesting story and very unnerving if you're down there in Austin.
It would be. I tried to sort of role play what it would be like to live in a neighborhood that was perceived to be a target for a serial bomber. I've experienced a lot of strange things in my life, but never that. I have been in a neighborhood several times where a pretty crazy shooting went down, but that doesn't have the same sense of fear component that, going about your day-to-day life and being perhaps a little bit fearful of random packages. I imagine people working for FedEx and UPS and the other commercial and government carriers are probably really concerned. Imagine.
Oh yeah. Imagine
kissing your wife goodbye and
FedEx.
Dropping her off at the post office today. Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think the takeaway from the story right now is the evolution of, as you said, the evolution of this. I guess what we suspect is a single perpetrator. And Joe, you said something interesting offline. We'd be remiss if we didn't at least mention it, that this could be one of those, I think it was Andy Warhol who famously posed the question, does life imitate art or does art imitate life? And that's kind of a what came first, chicken or the egg type conundrum. But Joe, you mentioned the Netflix series.
Yeah. InfoWars has a piece up on this. It's also on the Drudge Report about was this guy inspired by a Netflix drama series that was about the Unabomber, Austin mail bomber, inspired by Netflix show about Ted Kaczynski. Now, I have not watched Netflix in a while, so I didn't even know this was on there, and it does look interesting. I do like to watch investigations and mysteries like this. But many people, according to Paul Joseph Watson's article, are beginning to ask whether the spate of bombings to hit Austin over the last week were inspired by a recent Netflix series about Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. A package containing nails, and pieces of metal destined for Austin exploded earlier today at a FedEx facility in a suburb of San Antonio, injuring one person. The explosion is almost certainly linked to 4 previous blasts, which have left 2 people dead and 4 injured. Now, it goes on to talk about the show tells the story of the FBI's hunt for Ted Kaczynski, a domestic terrorist who is responsible for a wave of bombings, including mail bombings from 1978 through 1995 that killed 3 people and injured 23 others. Kaczynski carried out the attacks to draw attention to his philosophical opposition to modern technology and industrialization. The Netflix show was popular, receiving a 92% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It was originally aired on the Discovery Channel before premiering on Netflix in December. While the show does offer condemnation of Kaczynski's terrorism from the perspective of his victims, much of the series romanticizes Kaczynski's motives, and his character is portrayed somewhat sympathetically throughout the film. Now, people are asking, is this the resurgence of the Unabomber series on Netflix related to this person's motivation? And there's no way to know that right now. This is all speculation, but it is an interesting coincidence nonetheless. And this guy seems to, I don't really remember all the specifics on the Unabomber. I am going to make a point to do some research this week into this case. And that's a long time to go without being caught, from 1978 to 1995.
Well, he went in fits and spurts. The Unabomber did. He would go dormant for about long enough for the public to sort of forget about the Unabomber, and then he would strike again. Now he ramped it up in, I'd say, 1993, 94. In fact, I remember my brother scheduled to fly from San Francisco to Oklahoma City to go to a family reunion, and the Unabomber had informed the mainstream media at that time that he was going to blow a plane up out of the sky that weekend. And my brother opted not to go to the family reunion, and my dad got really mad at him. He was like, "I can't believe you're canceling this trip because of the slim, almost non-existent possibility that you could be on a plane that this person's going to blow up." And I remember my brother, who was maybe 20 years old, 21 years old at the time, he just put his foot down. He was not getting on a plane that weekend. So the Unabomber thing, through a good portion of the 80s, you really didn't hear about the guy. And then there was that almost, we didn't have the word meme back then, but the composite sketch of the guy showed, a hooded character, somebody in a hoodie with a big pair of aviator sunglasses. And, the kind of the joke, back then was that could be pretty much anybody. And of course, the American public, always looking for that sort of dark irony in things. I think it was the Halloween of 1994 or 1995. The number one costume of that Halloween was the Unabomber. So he became, a cultural phenomenon. And frankly, Joe, I think a lot of people forgot that there were dead bodies left in the wake of this guy, because he became this larger than life.
Yeah.
Almost, I almost dare not say it, but almost a folk figure to a degree. And I just want to mention quickly, while we're talking about the Hollywood component of this, a new friend of the Hagmann Report, Bill Chapman's got a new piece up on the Hagmann Report, The New Age of Entertainment. And Steve Quayle's got it up at stevequayle.com as well. It's a good piece. And I would recommend that our listeners, if you're interested in Hollywood and where it's headed, more so than where it comes from in this particular piece, to check it out. Again, that's at hagmanreport.com. Just posted about an hour ago by Bill Chapman himself, Joe, as you know, an expat out of Hollywood from the Atlanta scene and a recent guest on The Daily Show.
Yeah, and I'll check that piece out. I do like Bill Chapman's writing, so absolutely. And Ted Kaczynski, as you said, it does have the Hollywood component. And see, I don't remember the figures that I just read. 3 dead, 23 injured. So from what I remember, though, I thought he killed a lot more people. But I know that he did a number on a lot of those people he sent bombs to. But see, this is one thing that bothers me about the Austin situation. Okay, so we have a guy who is, or a woman, but most likely, statistically, it's a man, about 99%.
Yeah, I'd be shocked, and I mean shocked if
white.
it turned out to be a woman, or a minority for that matter, but go ahead.
Probably a white man. and who knows the age range. This is what, looking at this case. So let's look at the string of events. In the last 17 days, you had 3 bombings in the city of Austin that were done by somebody who dropped a package off in front of someone's house. The first 2 bombings killed people, and the other ones injured the rest. And on what happened as I guess we call that the first round, the porch bombs. So what happened on Sunday was the bomber changed his tactics and MO, and set a device on the side of a road and tied a tripwire across it, or a sidewalk. I'm not sure either way. I don't know. I've seen the street, but it looks like the blast was concentrated on the side of the road.
Police described it. I just read that right before we went on air. Police described it as a package that was affixed to a metallic yard sign.
Yeah.
So that would be where the package was, and then they ran, as police described it, a tripwire or monofilament, fishing line type wire that apparently tripped the 2 young men off their feet. But go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, and thankfully they did not die. So we've seen after the packages were delivered on the front lawn, it seems like this bomber builds the bombs and then delivers them personally. So that's how it has been until Sunday. Now, we see the explosion happen today, but what, John? That package had to be mailed earlier in that day or the day before, as yesterday was a Monday. But
I'm guessing it was mailed yesterday.
What does it say that the bomb got through any detection of it being a bomb, yet blows up on the conveyor belt? Is that and if there's a 6th device, which we're going to talk about separately, but is this consistent? Is this consistent with what we know already? The law enforcement authorities said yesterday, look on your front porch. If it doesn't say UPS, Amazon, or FedEx, call the police. And then today we wake up to the news that one was detonated in a FedEx facility with a Austin address. So is this the evolution of this bomber? Is this a copycat, or is this the same person? I guess is question number 1. Then question number 2 would be, is there a device, and this is just rumor, this is speculation, but is there another device that was captured that was not detonated? And if so, that could be bad for the bomber. There is a lot of mistakes you can make, from fingerprints to DNA, all kinds of things, if they have an undetonated device.
That list is almost infinite. There are certain crimes that you're more likely to get away with than others. And I don't know why, Joe, but I've always had probably a slightly unhealthy interest in criminology and penology and just pretty much all things bad. And, I don't know if listeners are aware of this, but kidnapping is a guaranteed prison sentence. You're not going to get away with kidnapping for ransom in 2018, not in the United States. Now down in South America, it might be a different story. But
you mean those movies I watched over the weekend with my wife? I think it was Horrible Bosses. It was 2 the number 2 was the second one where they kidnapped their boss or whatever. But
I believe number 2 was called Really Horrible Bosses.
Yeah, so that doesn't work, huh?
No, kidnapping is not. Kidnapping's not going to work. And back in the day, early Alcatraz inmate George Machine Gun Kelly could tell you all about kidnappings that didn't work even back then. And I've always found this interesting. I don't want to go on a tangent, but the kidnapping he and his wife and a couple accomplices tried to pull off got foiled when the man, the corporate titan, the corporate baron being held for ransom, was ensconced on a farm in rural Texas, and he was able to recall, based on the times they fed him each day, the sound of an airplane going overhead. This was in the early 1930s, and they were able to do what we would call doxing today, and they were able to vector where 2 airplanes that were flying the U.S. postal mail would fly over at this given time each day, and that put them in a 10-mile approximation of where this kidnapped individual had been stashed for a week. And it turned out that Machine Gun Kelly's wife's mom had a farm in that area, and that's how they busted him, and he wound up on Alcatraz, and that's back in the early 1930s.
I never knew that.
So,
that's interesting.
It's a great little story, huh? So kidnapping, you're not going to get away with it. Bank robbery in Los Angeles is the number 1 crime, and chances are you're not going to get away with it. Particularly,
okay, John. Let's talk about this for a sec. Bank robberies. I agree. It's sloppy. It is. There's too many variables today. Too many things that can go wrong with a bank robbery. So my question is, why do people hit the banks instead of the trucks that drive the banks? Do you see people robbing banks more often?
Back. Yeah, the banks don't shoot back. I mean, if you're going to take down an armored car,
you can get it done without shots.
Well, you've got to have a crew, and that crew's got to be ready to shoot. And with a quick glimpse to Hollywood, probably shouldn't even say this because we're supposed to be against all this stuff, but that robbery scene in Heat, the early 1990s film with De Niro, they fictionalize an armored car takedown in that. But I watched a special a few years back on some of the safety precautions that armored cars have nowadays, and they've got the exploding die packets that are on RFIDs. So as soon as you take a sack of money X number of feet or yards away from the vehicle, the die pack explodes. It blows purple dye, not only all over the cash, rendering the cash unusable, but all over the perpetrator as well.
That doesn't wash off for weeks.
Yeah, you're basically walking around with a name tag saying, I did it. And then the other thing that the armored cars, and they've had this for years, is what in Hollywood we call AB foam. And AB foam, as the name would indicate, is you take two solutions, solution A and solution B. And when the two come together, they form a foam, almost like the head on a beer or a soda. But that foam is rock hard. In Hollywood, they use it to make mountains and caves and rock formations. You can walk around on it. It's rock hard. And AB foam blasts out of jets in the sides of the back of the armored car, and it locks all the money up in this rock hard foam. And you would literally need to go at it with jackhammers to get the money out. So, but anyway, we've gotten way off track. The original point was, there are certain crimes where they're too complex and you're going to get caught. And kidnapping is one of them. Bank robbery is another. But another biggie is bombings. And the reason why is because it takes a ton of components to put the bombs together. When I was in high school, Joe, we had a bomber in my hometown. And this was an incredible case. Long story short, bombs were blowing up in homes around Fremont, California, my hometown. And a bomb expert, a civilian explosives expert, went to the Fremont Police Department, went to the detectives, got with the Gold Shields, and started to describe or explain what they needed to look for. And he was an expert in explosives. And come to find out, at the end of the day, he was the bomber. He went to the police numerous times, went through hours and hours of interviews, and the cops loved the guy. They thought that this guy was on their team. Come to find out, there had just been a new technology released in digital clocks. This is back in the early 1980s. Digital clocks had now made the timers so that you could set the timers beyond 1 year. In the early era of digital clocks, like alarm clocks, you could only set it out to 364, 365 days. But once this bomber found a brand of digital clock that enabled him to set it past the 1 year mark, and he was in fact planting these bombs in unfinished homes. And then the bombs would blow up, 12, 14, 16 months later. And he himself was the bomber, and he actually got caught. So I did live in my hometown where there was a serial bomber. Frankly, I was in junior high in my first year of high school when it happened. I really didn't pay it much attention. Bombers, at the end of the day, they either blow themselves up or they get caught.
Okay. And I'm looking here. This is a terrible source of information. This is the 10 infamous bombers who were civilians. And they throw things in here like the inventor of the nuclear bomb and Oppenheimer and the inventor of dynamite. So it's not really a good list of serial bombers, but it does note the Tsarnaev brothers, the Boston Marathons, which is a whole nother can of worms we're not going to get into today. But it also mentions Timothy McVeigh, as he was, a one-time bomber. We also interviewed, when he was alive, Sinclair. Was it Sinclair? Larry Sinclair? Why can't I think of his name?
Larry Grathwold.
Grathwold, that's it. He was in the infiltrated the Weather Underground by Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn, who also bombed several locations, including the Pentagon and a police station in San Francisco, where they killed a police officer and got away with it. And then you have, the Unabomber. But should this be connected? Should this all be the same person? Should we be alarmed about the rate that this guy seems to be moving? And I would say, as I said earlier, he's probably a male, probably white. Who knows the age? I'd say anywhere from 18 to to 45, 50 even maybe. But maybe he's a little younger. I don't know. It's such a weird thing, the way this is unfolding. And, these are fascinating cases to me. As you said, John, I'm very intrigued by the mystery, the investigation. I love to cover stuff like this. It's unfortunate that it's happening, but when you have these, crime mysteries that are ongoing, especially something so rare as a bombing, it's interesting to see how the authorities respond and how they work and how the situation unfolds. I'm sure it's terrifying for anybody who lives around this area. I would not want to have to worry about this on an hour-to-hour basis or day-to-day basis as you move about trying to be productive in your day. So, what's next, and what is the motivation? Authorities were asking the bomber to reach out to them. They raised the reward to over $100,000, and now we see that this bomber seems to be stepping it up, and that should be of great concern to all. And we're going to continue to follow this story, but definitely, very captivating story.
It is. There's a couple of things that I'd like to mention quickly before we move on. The first is, back in the Unabomber era, I remember the police saying that one of the key characteristics of a serial bomber is that he, typically a white male, probably has an area of the home, a spare bedroom, a hobby shop, a shed, a garage that the rest of the family is not allowed to go into. This is kind of like dad's room, I guess maybe what we would call today a man cave, but more of a repair shop type environment. And that was actually, out in the mainstream media. It was part of the, sometimes profilers will give away one or two of their tricks when they need the public's help. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then the last piece, Joe, you and I both watched the live stream of the press conference with the ATF and FBI agents there in Texas. And one of the reporters quipped toward the end of the presser that she said, "Well, what do you know? What we've got so far is a bunch of we don't knows." And at that very moment, the lead responder to the press interview steps away from the mic, and his number two man comes in, and you can see this guy. You can almost see that he's got a little bit of a look of consternation on his face. Sweat's probably starting to bead on his forehead. He says a couple of throwaway, unimportant sentences, and then he passes it to the lady, who's going to give it to Telemundo and Univision, et cetera, in Spanish. And that was the end of the live stream. So Joe, I think you and I both agree that the vast majority of evidence the police have collected, the public's totally ignorant of.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's the way it has to be. And just reading here, excuse me, from what an ATF agent said, I believe it is, a former FBI agent, who says that this has reached a new level of sophistication. It's required that you have a technical know-how, speculating that the bombs likely used triggers that were pressure sensitive or involving a mercury switch, which closes an electrical circuit when liquid mercury flows into electrodes, like what would happen when the switch is unbalanced. Now, I would say a mercury switch is much more sophisticated than a pressure sensitive detonation. If he's using mercury switches, then yeah, he's definitely in that. I mean, he's already obviously a bomber, but he's got more experience than I would have guessed.
What if he's pretending? What if he's pretending to be? This would be a really interesting flip the script. What if he's actually super pro, and for some reason, unbeknownst to us at this time, he starts out appearing to be an amateur?
Well, that's what this is some of the debate that's going on about this right now. So some people think that it doesn't make sense, or it could be more than one person, as we see the elevation from the first bomb to the second bomb was 10 days, and then from that bombing till the next one was 6 days, and then we have this in the last few days this new wave of bombing. So is this guy escalating? And if he continues to escalate at this rate, I'll tell you, he'll be done in a few weeks for sure. And I mean, this is it's pretty bad when you think about it. He's already killed 2 people. He's injured several others, and he does not seem to be slowing down, instead intensifying his attempts to blow people up. So, I mean, I'd say he's unmarried. Again, I think he's a white guy, probably anywhere from 25 to 50. And who knows beyond that right now.
Switching gears, because I think we've covered everything we know at this point. Now, you and I have to be careful that we don't just roll off for the rest of the show into speculation world, because I'm sure we could go 90 minutes just batting ideas back and forth. And who knows, maybe a few of the listeners would find it interesting. But I want to give a tip of the hat to one of our listeners who checked in on Hagmann Report yesterday. I assume it's okay to use his full name. He uses it in the forum. So Rich Peacock checked in from the UK, Joe, and he gave us an attaboy. And, we get so much sort of vitriolic and critical communications. It's nice when somebody gives you a slap on the backside when you're round third. And this is what Rich had to say. I just want to say how important Doug Hagmann and his team of intrepid reporters. Now, Joe, I've been called a lot of things in my life, but never an intrepid reporter. Thank you, Rich. His team of intrepid reporters have become to me in London, UK. I've learned a great deal of invaluable information, but also values which help me navigate the crazy times we are living in. Many thanks. Joe, we're intrepid reporters.
Well, that's news to me, and I'll take the compliment, and thank you very much. But yeah, if you want to switch gears here, let's do this. We have the Maryland school shooting that we're waiting for more information on, that we covered as much as we know at this moment. But we also have, this continuation of the Florida shooting. I don't know if you saw this story, John, but the brother of the Florida shooter, Cruz, his brother was arrested for trespassing at the school property as he was riding a skateboard there, and he said he wanted to revisit the site and soak it all in. And then we have this march.
That's kind of creepy.
Yeah, no, I understand it, I guess.
Yeah, I kind of do too in a weird way. But anyway, to be honest with you, Joe, it's not on my radar at all. Go ahead and unpack this one.
Well, no, I mean, there's nothing really more to say that, except there are some very interesting differences in the appearance of Nick Cruz and his brother, which makes you think they're half brothers. I don't know if when you get a chance, John, do a search for the brother of Nicholas Cruz.
I will. I've got a piece, Joe. If you mentioned something last night.
This March for Life, or this
March
against
let's do
guns.
That first. Okay.
There's a few pieces of news that are about this David Hogg kid, attention hog, as we like to call him. And I'm not trying to belittle him by calling him names. I'm just calling it like I see it. But he has been making just tons of media appearances everywhere. And they have this big march coming up, funded by Hollywood, against guns, that is going to be coming up this weekend on Saturday. Now, there was a number of interviews that this David Hogg continues to do, one of which he did on CBS yesterday morning, where he said the NRA has been basically threatening us. Really, basically threatening you. What does that mean? And also, I mean, it's just some, microaggression thing. There was another interview where he said, as one of his answers, that one of the biggest obstacles he's faced in his anti-gun agenda is white privilege. And I want to talk about that a little, but back to what he said about the NRA. And he said that since they've been pushing for stricter gun control, the NRA had reached out to them. And what he says is, the way that they've been reaching out to us is basically threatening us. And they didn't go no further to explain what he means. And so what is how are you basically threatened? It doesn't make sense. Anyway, this David Hogg gave another interview, and this is on Daily Wire. Anti-gun Parkland students give most insane, embarrassing interview ever. And you can go to the Daily Wire to watch it if you want. There's a number of clips, and this kid's also on a commercial saying politicians are the NRA's female dogs, swearing and whatnot. And there's a flurry of these video clips on this Daily Wire piece. But these people are going to have 1.5 million people this weekend. Marching.
I've read anywhere from 500,000. I mean, these are tough to get a beat on before the fact, because sometimes they overestimate, and the biggest flop ever. Remember what was it called? The Patriot Spring? Remember that thing that flopped really bad in late 2013 or early 2014? We talked about it for a while, but it was supposed to be like a massive Patriot march on Washington, and about 500 people showed up. Remember that? It was like the
Not really. Apparently it was
I think it was
forgettable.
called the Patriot Spring or something. It was a spin off the Arab Spring, and it was supposed to be patriots and libertarians and Second Amendment people were going to descend on Washington. And it just the reason it's gone into the dustbin of history, it was a huge talking point. It was all over InfoWars. It was headed up by this colonel, and it just absolutely flopped. Listeners, if you connect with what I'm talking about, go ahead and hit us up with an email. But this is kind of interesting, Joe. This is from the Washington Post. I want to not to besmirch any of these students per se, but just to get this straight on the record. Okay, these kids did not put together the March for Our Lives.
No.
Okay, not even close. Quote, this is from the Washington Post. Quote, the National Park Service permit application was filed by Dina Katz, K-A-T-Z. That's a well-known last name in Hollywood. Identified by the Miami Herald as the co-executive producer of Dancing with the Stars.
There you
which
go.
has been on TV for, 12 years or something like that, who was brought in by students to plan the event. Organizers have secured nearly $2 million in donations via a GoFundMe page, along with donations from Oprah Winfrey, Steven Spielberg, and George and Amal Clooney. Now, having been in Hollywood for many years, I can tell you that no place is more of a petri dish for grabbing the newest, hottest trend, and social media has just exacerbated that to the nth degree than Hollywood. And it's interesting that they would come up with hashtag Me Too, because I would argue that hashtag Me Too is don't leave me out of whatever today's trend is. And that's how Hollywood works. So these students who I had great empathy for as victims, as survivors, Joe, a month ago. But let's be honest. I mean, if you're in a classroom on the other side of campus from where the shooting went down, I don't know, it kind of starting to feel like convenient celebrity to me. And again, I'm not trying to be unkind. I'm just stating my honest opinion.
And how about this? How about the kid who does not share the same views as these people who are constantly on TV? I'll give you his name in a second. The kid
That's my point.
who shielded his classmates, but with the Kevlar sheeting that was in the junior ROTC room.
Yeah,
the kids who prepared to ambush the shooter if they came into the room, protecting the students. The kid who talked about not making this about banning guns and politicizing it. The kid who CNN basically called a liar after that he refused to go through their basically transcribed gun rally. Kyle Kashuv, is that how you pronounce it? Kashuv. And this kid is a pro-gun, pro-Trump supporter, and he's basically been banished from this group of kids. But he was on the interview scene in the very beginning, too, until his political views came out. And also, from the Daily Wire, these kids, these hogs, these Matt Caskies, and these Eve Gonzalez's are not only talking about the gun control issue. As I said, they're talking about voting. And listen to some of these comments. They say, Hogg says it's not a Democrat or Republican issues, and he downplays the importance of FBI and local officials and their role they played. And then he attacks the NRA, he attacks Dana Lausch. He also criticizes his fellow classmate Kyle because of the different views, and he calls him out for his ridiculous and factually inaccurate comments. And then he goes on to say the politicians are corrupt. They don't want young people and minorities and women to vote. They only want retirement homes to vote. White privilege is a problem, and the Republicans are committing tyranny on the rest of our country. And they also talk about college debt, health care, net neutrality, on and on and on. So these kids are just basically liberal left-wing CNN talking heads.
Well,
that's all they are.
It's pretty simple to understand. The original free speech movement, which ironically sprouted from the exact same terra firma that Antifa tried to burn down last year when Milo Yiannopoulos tried to speak at Berkeley. And I'm talking the exact same square footage at UC Berkeley. That produced what? Well, that was 1964, I believe. So that produced all the teachers who began teaching in the 1970s and early 1980s who are just about retired now, but they taught all these kids who are in their late teens. This is a generational type thing. So communist infiltration, and you mentioned Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn earlier, Joe, that same communist infiltration that seems like musty, dusty history from way back in the day and who even knows what the Weather Underground was and blah, blah, blah. No, That same communist infiltration has moved through the school system. It indoctrinated a generation of baby boomers who indoctrinated a generation of Gen Xers who have indoctrinated the David attention hogs of the world. And again, calling on my personal experience in Hollywood, you don't want to give a teenager a bunch of mics, a publicist, and a bunch of cameras. That's a bad move.
I mean, this
and
kid
that's
can't even
exactly
vote.
what's happened. Well, not only that, but these kids haven't faced real life yet at all. They haven't paid rent. They haven't seen half their paycheck gobbled up by taxes. They're not old enough to own firearms. They have no clue of what it's like to feel the need to protect the domain of your home because they live in their parents' homes. So they don't realize this, but they still have the sort of like mommy and daddy protect the home mentality. And until they move out at age 25 or 27 with a PhD in cultural integrity, then they don't know how the real world works. So I'm sorry, maybe I'm just a crusty old guy, but I don't really give what these kids are talking about very much credence whatsoever. But where I do place the blame for this social justice warrior virtue signaling, and that's what this is. It's virtue signaling. Yeah. It's soaking in the adoration of a bunch of libs that are clapping and applauding and funding a huge moment in the sun that you never anticipated 6 months ago you would get until a bunch of your classmates were killed 5 weeks ago in a school that you weren't killed in, but now you're a superstar for the liberal left. Joe, I'm telling you, we're going to look back on Broward County as one of the crucial turning points going down a very, very bad highway where the libtard left is going to use quote unquote survivors to push their agenda, because these people have absolutely no couth whatsoever. These people are agenda driven and they virtue signal back and forth to one another, which fuels each other's fires. I read an interesting article earlier today. There's quite a bit out on this today about the exodus out of California. And even Silicon Valley is relocating. The 24-year-old heiress of the Dell fortune has moved her company to Los Angeles because the Silicon Valley cocoon has become such a politically correct, virtue signaling environment that it's annoying to people who are more free thinkers. Elon Musk relocated down to Los Angeles as well, and the list goes on and on. California has a net loss of 140,000 people from last year. So that's 140,000 more people migrated out of California than moved in. And it's a different story, I suppose, for another time. But that's because free thinkers don't want to be around a bunch of virtue signalers. I don't care what the hive thinks. I care about what Scripture says and what the founding documents say and what I think. And then I'll take my thoughts in to a room of intelligent people and bounce them around the room. And if they're errant thoughts, Joe, you should be hanging around people who are smart enough to correct you in your errant thinking. Otherwise, you're part of the hive.
Yeah.
And that's what these kids are celebrating.
And this indoctrination, John, I'm glad you brought this up because that reminded me of of a video I wanted to post on Hagmann Report of an interview with a former Russian KGB agent that talks about the plans of infiltration and demoralization and on and on and on. And that I said I would do that last night on the show, so I'm going to post that after we're done here today. But yeah, and other things they do, you can call them whatever you want. You can call it a communist infiltration. You can call them socialists. You can call them liberals or progressives or whatever. They continue to change their name as to not be identified. But it's the same people. It's the same ideas. It's just repackaged. And this has been a battle since the beginning of this country that we've been engaged in. So for anybody to think, these people have stopped trying to influence us and our government and our way of life, that is the wrong way to think. There will always be a threat out there until this world ends. And we need to understand that. And the sooner we understand that, the sooner we can get towards fixing the problems that we have. Because there will always be. It doesn't matter. There is evil in this world. And that evil will attempt to influence in any way it can. And it will find an ideology. It will find a belief system, whatever it is. But it will never be erased.
It'll find a pool of convenient dupes. This ties in nicely to something you mentioned last night in studio, Joe, off air, but in studio nonetheless. This is from Zero Hedge, posted yesterday. 74% of Americans believe the deep state is running the country. And this, again, is from Zero Hedge, posted yesterday. We didn't get a chance to get to this, but let's take a look at this for a minute or two, Joe. So it says here, for the past 2 years, the long-running narrative, at least that promulgated by the mainstream media, which continues to, quote, explain away, in quote, Hillary Clinton's loss to Donald Trump, is that Americans had fallen for a massive, long-running fake news scam, parenthetically, in part aided and abetted by the likes of Facebook, which boosted Trump's popularity at the expense of Hillary's as part of some giant Russian collusion conspiracy theory between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin, which Mueller was supposed to uncover but has instead shifted to investigating obstruction, seemingly unable to find anything. Okay, second paragraph. But what if that entire narrative is dead wrong? What if Americans have become so skeptical? They use the wrong preposition here. What if Americans have become so skeptical of the government process and structure, they never needed a fake news boost to vote for an establishment outsider? According to a new poll, that's precisely the case, because a supermajority of Americans believe the faction of unelected officials known as the deep state is orchestrating policy in Washington, D.C., and effectively running the nation. Almost finished, listeners. The Monmouth University Polling Institute found no less than 74% of Americans believe in a deep state when it is described as a collection of unelected officials running policy. Only 21% do not believe this kind of group exists. Joe, I know how much you love polls. What say you?
Well, I don't know, John. I never know with polls. You can't trust them one way or the other, it seems. But that's interesting nonetheless. And I was just looking at here at the clock. All right, we got about 14 minutes left, so we got some time left to cover a number of other things. First, I wanted to ask you this: today's the first day of spring, as we said. We had Dane Wigington on a little bit ago, I think last week, and he was talking about how many of these nor'easter storms are hitting the Northeast in New York to Washington, D.C. area and Boston. And now we see another storm is set to hit New York City and nor'easter, fourth in a month, bringing up to 16 inches along the I-95 corridor that travels all the way from down to Florida all the way up through Maine. But that is that's pretty interesting, John, a fourth nor'easter. But the reason I asked you about Dane Wigington is I can't remember if he said why he thought that there were so many. I know it was weather modification, but I don't know if he was saying it's targeting this area for something or something else was causing this, but it's definitely rare to see this in March especially.
Well, it's really hard to follow. Now, our listeners will probably, for the most part, I don't know a whole lot about nor'easters except we read about them on the West Coast, but they don't affect us, at least not as a direct weather pattern. Dane has been on very high alert lately, Joe. In speaking with him offline as well as you're speaking with him on air, I don't want to say he's tuned up because that would sound almost a little bit derisive, and I don't mean it that way. But there's a definite difference in his tone over the past couple times we've had him on the show and interviewed him on the show, and he calls it I'm going to butcher this. It's nucleated ice something or other. But what it basically boils down to is we've had 20 plus years now of geoengineering up in the sky and spraying these particulates not just over the United States but all over the world. I've mentioned on this show and on the Hagmann Report. It's interesting, but those 7 countries that Wesley Clark was informed about back in 2002, of the 5 of 7 that have had American interference, whether it's something huge like killing Gaddafi or executing Saddam Hussein or something more minor like sanctions on North Korea.
The monsoons in Vietnam, or
what about
so many of them?
Remember the big flood in Pakistan a few years back? Actually, that's about 5 years ago now. This is weather modification. And, it seems, I'll just say this, Joe, and I'll hand it back to you. It seems that weather modification is something that a lot of people who listen to our program are aware of, but it's kind of like a gorilla in the room that you sort of sweep aside and shove it in the closet because it's just too big to take on. Where it's like, I read Dane's articles and they're scientifically crafted. They're backed up 7 ways from Sunday. We post them at Hagmann Report, and this is some serious white paper type work. But it's like this enormous thing, and I think the average American is struggling to to get the paychecks pulled together and pay the mortgage, pay the rent, to try to undoctrinate their children for the 3 hours a day that they have them after they come out of their little commie factories. And I think that most people, to be perfectly frank, are ignoring something. And if you listen to Dane, again, whether it's a personal phone call or his interviews, he says it's at our own expense. The last thing I'll mention, I think he said this last week on the show, we were talking about Agenda 2030, and he cut me off. He's like, John, there will be at this point no 2030. We're going to be lucky to see 2025. Now, I usually mentally kind of push back against statements like that, but I'll tell you what, Joe, Dane certainly believes it.
Yeah, and one of the things that really concerns me about with climate is the methane. The methane aspect of it is a very serious and dangerous aspect, and we also know by reading scripture that much of the earth in the end times will be burned. And how does that come about? And are we of the generation that sees that happen? And then that would definitely pertain to us. But to I got an email yesterday, and I'm looking for it right now. It was from a listener who sent information about a article they read on chemtrailing, and it was something along the lines of, they're telling us or proof here, there. This is from Ralph P. From Canada. They just admitted they are controlling the weather, and they do this all the time. I've seen articles like this for years now, and this is so funny how they do this, because as they will sit there with a straight face and say that chemtrails are a conspiracy theory, they'll go on to talk about cloud seeding and how it is affecting the environment. Does cloud seeding work? Here's how scientists are checking. Sunday, March 18th, 2018. Weather is a valuable resource that affects nearly all aspects of life on Earth. It also is limited, so people use a variety of methods to ensure that supply meets demand. One such technique is cloud seeding, adding particles to the atmosphere to promote formation of rain or snow. Today's many entities across the West, including state and local government agencies, utilize seed clouds in an effort to boost winter snowfalls in the mountains. More ski resorts, as an example, they're using to fuel the water for crops and fuel dams and generate hydraulic power. Cloud seeding also has been used in efforts to disperse fog at airports, boost summer rainfall, and reduce hail. In fact, cloud seeding occurs in more than 50 countries worldwide. Yet, despite all of this activity, we still don't know whether it works or not. So the person who sent this to me, Ralph, thank you, is pointing out that these people are admitting that they spray the skies in order to change the climate. Now, that they have been admitting this for years, but I guess the word chemtrail, they will never admit to, whether it is, that's what this is or not, or that's what we see from those planes or not. Obviously, they're spraying something with those planes. They have admitted to cloud seeding for years. So why is it when you talk about chemtrails, you're labeled a conspiracy theorist? That's something that I'll never understand, except for they do such a great job with the spin and their PR in the battle on PR that they, for the most part, have been able to dupe average American citizens who apparently never look in the sky or pay attention on a clear morning in the spring or summer or fall, when those planes start coming overhead and spraying, on a day that's supposed to be 100% sun all day. And, before you know it, by the afternoon, early evening, it's cloud covered because of what these planes had sprayed. That is not normal. But it's beyond me how every person in this country does not understand that. But I want to thank you, Ralph, for sending that article, as it is a great example of the battle that we fight. Yeah, they just admitted they're controlling the weather, but what can be done about it?
I'm not sure. If you ask Dane Wigington that question, he says at this point it will take a divine intervention. And that got us off into an interesting conversation about spiritual beliefs that I'm not at liberty to speak about publicly. But I want to cover one more thing quickly today, Joe, before we wrap it up. Paul Craig Roberts wrote a piece for the Institute for Political Economy. Now, this was curated by Daily Sheeple, but of course posted as well at the Institute for Political Economy. Title of the piece, War is on the Horizon. Have Washington and its British vassal set a stage for testing whether Russia has the stomach for war? How else do we interpret the announcement by General Sergei Rudskoy, chief of the Operational Directorate of the Russian General Staff, that, quote, this is important, listeners, quote, "We have reliable information at our disposal that U.S. instructors have trained a number of militant groups in the vicinity of the town of Atanf, that's in Syria, to stage provocations involving chemical warfare agents in southern Syria. They are preparing a series of chemical munitions explosions. This fact will be used to blame the government forces. The components to produce chemical munitions have already been delivered to the southern de-escalation zone under the guise of humanitarian convoys of a number of NGOs, or non-government organizations. The provocations will be used as a pretext by the United States and its allies to launch strikes on military and government infrastructure in Syria." Okay, today's date is Tuesday, March 20. That was, again, the general who is the chief of the operational directorate of the Russian General Staff. That would be, I think, a position similar to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs in the United States. So this is top military brass in Russia. I just read to you the direct quote. Russia is saying that there's a false flag being planned in southern Syria by U.S.-backed mercenaries. This article, Craig Roberts goes on to write, "Don't expect to hear anything about this in the totally discredited Western prostitute media, which is a propaganda ministry for war. The Russian government must be kicking itself that it again failed to finish the job in Syria and instead permitted Washington to expand its Syrian presence, arm and train its mercenaries, provide chemical weapons, and assemble its fleet to attack Syrian forces in order to prevent the reconquest of Syrian territory." Joe, I know we're running short on time. This article goes on to explain the war of words between Sergei Lavrov, British Prime Minister Theresa May, and the very dubious story that we reported last week of a nerve agent poisoning in Salisbury over in the UK of a former Russian spy and his daughter. That story's turned into a complete soup sandwich, Joe. You can't disseminate fact from fiction. The point is, the war drums are pounding, and they're pounding hard. And this is not a joke. We're talking Russia. This is not the Chia Pet over in North Korea or some Iraqis that can't figure out how to put a T-72 tank in reverse. Joe, what do you say?
Well, obviously Russia is a threat. I wouldn't, it's not as big as a threat as I think people make it out to be, but either way, we don't want to see any kind of conflict, either in Syria or with Russia. It's ridiculous that we're even have to have these kind of discussions, and we have President Trump in the White House. But, what has he been doing in order to, keep this from happening? And we have breaking news that President Trump has released a statement saying he is going to meet President Putin, and what does he say? The arms race that is getting out of control. President Trump to meet Putin to discuss arms race that is getting out of control in the not too distant future, according to sources within the White House. So that is going to happen, and he is working on this. I think he's taking this very seriously. Oh,
that, in my opinion, is a presidential response directly from President Trump to the State of the Union March 1st in Moscow that the Hagmann Report and myself and many others, Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, we all covered it. And you can just go to HagmannReport.com. There's some articles from last week about that. But this is a response to President Putin's braggadocious comments regarding the new third generation of high-tech Russian weapons.
Yeah, and we detailed on Hagmann Report what those weapons were and their name, the Satan II, which is pretty... I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know what the people.
The Russians call it Samat.
Okay. Well, either way, it is something that is front and center on a lot of people's minds, even though it doesn't seem like it in the mainstream media. I've been getting many emails on Syria and potential conflicts that have been unfolding there, and the rhetoric back and forth between Lavrov and U.S. officials, as he said that it would be the last thing the U.S. ever did would be to launch a strike on Damascus, a U.S. military strike. But we see that it is the situation is continuing in Syria, and we will be front and center reporting on all this for you each and every day. I want to thank everybody for listening. SimplyCleanFoods.net is our sponsor. Go there for your storable foods and your survival food needs. It's a great company, SimplyCleanFoods.net. All right, John, it was a great show. We'll be back tomorrow.
The Hagmann Daily Show is brought to you by the Hagmann Report. Tune in to the Hagmann Report weekdays, 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, go to HagmannReport.com. That's HagmannReport.com.